All right. Hello, my loves. I have a special guest, Dr. Aimie Apigan, on the podcast today. Welcome, Aimie.
Thank you, Betsy. It's so good to see you. Like I have missed you. And as soon as I saw you, it was just like, I went back to Sedona, Arizona.
Oh,
And I was like,
yes.
oh, I remember that felt experience with you in the moment. And it was
Mhm.
wonderful. And it's just so good to be here with you today. Thank you for this.
I'm glad you brought that up because even, the little bit of nerves that I had when you said Sedona, Arizona, it was like my body just calmed. Aimie and I went to a really neat experiential retreat, a week long with Peter Levine. And it was really transformative. We really got to know each other. And it was like we just formed this little family so quickly. And so it was really exciting to me when I heard about, Aimie wanting to be on my podcast and collaborating a little more because we really overlap so much in our areas. We're both helping people heal from trauma and the effects that it leaves on our bodies. So
let me just also say this, that I remember that you got to do an exercise with Peter on, I believe it was the generational trauma piece for you. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And I just remember watching that and feeling like I was holding that container for you and just, oh my goodness, like the powerful transformation that I saw, that I was able to witness for you. And I know how meaningful that piece specifically was for you.
Yeah, it really was. I don't even know if it was half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour. It felt like, just this expansive time that I was like, is this really happening? Everyone was, in this story with me, healing this intergenerational, these stories, this trauma. And, I did feel a little bit like, oh, I'm taking up everyone's time. But as we know, when people are able to watch that and hold that space, and they can even experience some of that healing themselves by watching someone else, sometimes even more powerfully because it's indirect and they're not getting as triggered or defensive. So thank you for sharing that.
That's the value of community, right?
Yes.
And just being in a community and actually being able to hold the space for someone else is a part of our healing journey. It's not just about us.
It really is true.
It really does get to be about us, right? Like the collective us.
Yes. And I didn't even realize, we just kind of all sat on the floor together. I was petting your dog, but I didn't realize what an influential person you are and what a community you have created.
Thank you. Yeah, it's quite amazing. And I kind of still pinch myself every once in a while, like, is this the impact that I've been able to have on the world? Because I never saw that. I didn't go into this like wanting this big impact. It was just like, hey, like I've been through hell. Yeah. Let me show you the way out.
Yes.
And if it's helpful to you, awesome. If it's not, that's fine. Like I'm still on my journey. We each have our own journey, and I'm totally willing to share what my journey has been and the different pieces that I've needed to bring in for my life, for Miguel, who I adopted. And yeah, people have really found a lot of value. And so they've been able to come in, and yeah, we've got this community, even of providers and practitioners around the world, Betsy. Wow. And it's just so inspiring to see the impact that I get to have on people that I never even meet directly. Right.
Yes. And amazing.
It's so meaningful. So meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe if you could just take a minute and tell us how you got into this work, because you weren't planning on studying trauma or specializing in it, right?
Maybe the other trauma, because I was actually a general surgery resident.
Okay.
Right. So like I was actually
like physical trauma, accidents and Yeah.
And as a general surgery resident, like we were the ones running the trauma codes in the emergency room. Yes. And very much like in the moment. Yeah. How do we help this person survive? Because like they're losing a lot of blood or whatever the situation may be. And so I've brought that into now the work that I do with this type of trauma. And it's very much like let's get really practical and let's get really efficient. And so surgery is all about efficiency. It's all about efficiency, right? Like we're not going to have you on the table doing surgery any longer than what we need to, because one, it's not necessary. The other, it's harmful. The longer that someone is under anesthesia, the more it's harmful to their body. And so the same thing that we can look at with this trauma, right? Like the longer that we are living under the effects of the anesthesia from trauma experiences, the longer it actually harms our bodies. And so let's get to work and let's figure out like what is the most efficient way. We're not going to cut corners. We need healing down to the cellular level. And that's where I've kind of been able to come in with the biology of trauma, is like, so much of this is biology on a cellular level, and we need to address that piece in order for the rest of it to just fall into place and for us to get back to a sense of wholeness. So yeah, I actually got into this as we look back at our life, like we can start to realize, oh, well, there's all these things that really went into it. But my big reason why was that when I was in medical school, I had just finished getting my master's in biochemistry, and I was getting ready to go back into third year of medical school. And I wanted my life, my time to be meaningful. And so I decided to become a foster parent during that time, and had no intentions, no idea of what it would turn into. And when they placed Miguel with me, he was 4 years old at the time, and had what I would consider a very typical story for many children who get placed in the foster care system. He had a very, very rough, traumatic, disruptive early childhood. And I thought, Betsy, I thought that time would heal. Yeah. As long as he had a loving, stable home. And I loved him more than I knew that I could love someone. And so those were the assumptions, but not only assumptions, right? Like we're told that. We are still told that, love heals and time heals. And it's not true, right? Like trauma gets into our body, and our body is still operating under that survival system, even though our external environment has changed. And so it's, how do we let our body actually know that we're no longer needing to survive? Like we can actually relax and let our guard down, because everything up until then has informed it that it can't do that. And it's done a number of adaptations. And now those adaptations have become our default. And we assume that our default is just our personality. Like, Betsy, this is just who I am. Love me. And it's like, no, I love you. And I see a greater capacity in you.
Yeah. Well, can I just ask about that? When you say things like trauma gets into our body, like I've been so fascinated by this because I came from a physical therapy background, medical background. And so I'm always, careful about saying like, oh, your hips hold a lot of emotions and trauma, because I don't know that that's, we can really prove that. But how do you explain that to people?
Yeah. And there's a couple different ways that we can look at how the body actually stores trauma. And when you talk about as a physical therapist, some of these locations in the body, the first thing that comes to mind is some of the bracing patterns that develop as part of those adaptations to overwhelm. It's so fascinating because we can look even at specific stages of neurodevelopment in early childhood. And there are specific bracing patterns that one will develop based on when we first started to experience overwhelm.
Wow. Are we talking like infancy, or can you give a couple examples of those?
Yeah. So the way that we've been able to really break things down also correlates with the levels of development of the brain. And by the brain, I do also mean the brain stem. And so we know that when infants are born, they actually don't have the capacity, that level of their brain has not developed to even be able to regulate their own nervous system. And so in that first 6 months of life, so 0 to 6 months of life, that is when the pons area of the brainstem is developing. And by developing, I mean like the physical structure is there, right? Like they've got a brainstem, but it's all of these nerves that are going into the brainstem, and then out of that brainstem to the higher areas of the brain. Are those pathways organized? Right. Are they efficient? Are they communicating what they're supposed to be communicating and not communicating what they're not supposed to be communicating? And all of that process requires so much pruning. And talking about flexibility and neuroplasticity, that's like the major time of neuroplasticity in our life is when things are actually developing. And so this is how, no matter what our life experiences are, whether we're having experiences of overwhelm, because we're not getting adequate co-regulation, for example, or if we're getting all the co-regulation that we need, either way, whatever it is, like our nervous system is literally adapting for its best survival at that time. And this is the power of the nervous system, right? Like its superpower is to be adaptable, is to be flexible. And so when an infant, and there's a number of reasons, some biochemical imbalances can cause this increased dysregulation of the nervous system. And so they require a larger degree of co-regulation from someone else, biological mom being the primary one that's going to provide that co-regulation. And so they need more of it, for example. And if she's busy, if she's got to go back to work, if she's stressed, if she's sick, like there's so many things that can come in between her ability to provide the level of co-regulation that her infant needs. The end result is still the same, Betsy, where the infant is going to be experiencing overwhelm, and that overwhelm comes in the form of, I feel my body amping up into that sympathetic state, and they don't have the capacity to bring that down like we do, right? Like we have that capacity, but they don't. And so literally a baby would go on to have a heart attack because the sympathetic state would just be this runaway train. And so the only save that they have is the dorsal vagal response. And it serves as a brake. And so it can be the only thing, and it's the only tool that they have. They don't have other tools. They don't have the kitchen or the pantry that they can go emotionally eat, right? They don't have any of the coping mechanisms that we as adults have access to. They only have that one coping mechanism. And so for that 0 to 6 months of life, if they don't get that adequate co-regulation, then they're starting to use that dorsal vagal brake to save them from completely falling apart physiologically, biologically, in their homeostasis. And so when that happens, that dorsal vagal response starts to cause bracing patterns.
Okay.
And those bracing patterns happen in their hips, happens in their thoracic inlet. And the purpose of those is to cut off the overwhelming sensations coming up from the body.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And so the way that the nerves run, right, like that vagus nerve especially, like runs up and it comes in here through our neck, and that's what's feeding information to the brainstem, to that pons area. And if the body is experiencing overwhelm, then those shoulders come up and we get tension here in order to cut off the sensations coming up the vagus nerve. So it's literally a way for us to manage overwhelm when we don't have any other coping mechanisms to manage that. But then you have somebody who has these lifelong tension patterns, right? We even talk about the psoas muscles, right? And boy, my goodness, trauma is stored in those psoas muscles. Why do we say that? Because those are the flexor muscles that start to brace in order to get through overwhelm when we have no other way to cope.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember even Peter Levine in one of his workshops showing a picture of a dog that was in a shame pattern. So these patterns of emotion and patterns of bracing and they're universal, they're primal, they're visceral, they're somatic. And so it's not like we're thinking, oh, I've got to turn my eyes down and look away. But when you're in that emotion of shame, you naturally, and bringing your shoulders up is one of the emotions of shame or postures of shame too. So that makes a lot of sense. And as someone who carries a lot of tension in my neck, that, you know, I've just thought, oh, that's just a place where I carry my stress. You hear it so commonly, but it probably has its origin clear back in childhood, infancy, feeling overwhelmed.
And this is where so many people actually experienced trauma in childhood, and they don't recognize it as trauma because it wasn't abuse. It wasn't neglect. Like it was just inadequate co-regulation before they even really had conscious awareness or even words to express that overwhelm. And so it can really just be this this felt sense of disconnect. And we can even look at the thoughts and belief patterns that come out of that 0 to 6 months of life. For those people, Betsy, their belief system coming out of that is that if I were to let myself feel, I would fall apart.
Wow.
And so for people who have, who just notice like, ooh, like that's actually like, I know that sounds silly because I actually know that I wouldn't fall apart, but that's what it feels like. And they will, you can see them like going through life, and people will even reach out to comfort them, and they won't be able to accept the comfort. Why? Because they don't want to have that moment of dropping down, actually feeling their emotion, because they have this felt sense that if I do that, like there's going to be possibly so much that's going to come out, I would fall apart. So I just can't let myself go there. And they're always in these bracing patterns then internally, even all the way down the back. So we have these erector spinae muscles that are in between our different vertebrae in our spine. Those develop bracing patterns.
Yeah. So just one level, can you see, I mean, as a physical
Yes.
therapist, you know, you just see
Exactly.
it's just on the side. So that in one spot can be a bracing pattern.
Right. And we want to look at these bracing patterns as, you know, at one point in time in your life, this helped you survive.
Yeah. Yes.
And
exactly.
It's no longer serving you.
Yes. 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 Because it did serve a purpose. It's not like your body
served a very important purpose.
or it should have known better. And you
Right.
didn't have to fight it.
It served a purpose, and we don't want to stay stuck there, Betsy.
Yes.
Right. And that's where I see a lot of people still going wrong with their trauma work, is that they want to just understand why they are how they are, but then stay there. Right. And it's almost like then we start to use that as an excuse for why I can't do more in life, or why everyone needs to just accommodate my triggers and not do that, and not use it as, hey, like this is actually something that I can change now. This doesn't have to be my future. This is actually not me and my personality. Like I can change these things.
Yeah, that is so hopeful and exciting. The part that I really like. Real quick though, before we talk about that part of it, could you just tell me a few of the most common manifestations physically that you see? Like, how does this usually show up in people's bodies later? Like everything, all the things. How doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's a lot, because the nervous system drives our whole health.
Yeah.
And when we look at just bracing patterns, we can see how those are going to affect our health chronically and in the long term. A lot of people develop some form of digestive symptoms.
That's what brought me to the work.
Right?
Yeah.
This is so common because the influence of the vagus nerve on the gut is huge. And so if we're going back and forth into that dorsal vagal brake and then out into the sympathetic and going back and forth between stressed and overwhelmed, that right there is going to cause digestive issues. And it can cause a number of them, everything from decreased motility of the stomach. So your stomach is not actually even able to break food down as well. You're making less acid, because when you're in overwhelm or stress, like that's not the time to be eating. And then, I mean, everything from the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, all of these systems that are designed to help us absorb the nutrients that we need for life get shut down. And so we can move towards diarrhea, we can move towards constipation, we can have IBS and have both, we can have pain, we can have bloating. And then there's all of the downstream effects on the actual kind of like the digestive tract in that tube, where because of these effects, now we have bacterial overgrowth. Now we have fungal overgrowth. Now we have this imbalanced microbiome. And now we have food sensitivities. Now we have leaky gut, and there's just no end to it. And the part of the difficulty is that when these things happen, it then affects the rest of the system as well. So it's not like it just stays in the gut. because now the inflammation is going to be traveling up the vagus nerve to the brain and causing brain inflammation. So for those people who maybe know a little bit about this, hopefully they do. If not, then here's your introduction to brain inflammation. But we have these cells called microglia in our nervous system, that they are the guardians, they are the protectors, they're gardeners, they're pruning, they're cleaning up, they're essential for a healthy nervous system. And they can undergo something that's called priming. A priming event will make them turn from being a protector and a guardian to like this savage soldier who's unleashing inflammation on everything because they see danger everywhere. And leaky gut and that inflammation in the gut can actually be a cause of a priming event for those microglia. And now you are much more prone to brain fog and the decision fatigue and all of these things that can come with brain inflammation. And it can be triggered by a lack of sleep. It can be triggered by even exposure to different chemicals or smells. All of these things now are triggering this stuff that wouldn't have been triggered before, but you've had this priming event, possibly from leaky gut or other things. And now you've got this on top of everything else. And for those people who are, undergoing some therapy process, hopefully they're doing that, right, Betsy? Hopefully they're doing somatic work and all those stuff. What can happen is that if they go too fast in their therapy process, if they're not titrating it and staying in their window of tolerance, that will re-trigger, and we call that activate, these primed microglia. And so those activation can be emotional now. It's not just something physical, like there can be emotional triggers that activate brain inflammation now. So it all becomes part of the same thing when we're looking at the nervous system and how do we promote health and flexibility and regulation. Well, now we've got to look at all of these pieces because they all come together to affect that nervous system.
Yes. Okay. So that probably leads us into how do you help it? If someone is suspicious that they never really thought of themselves as having trauma, or they know that they did, and that's kind of how they identify, they get to this place, their body's freaking out and showing it. What do you advise?
So, actually what I do, and I'll just share with you what I do, even though I'm a medical physician, I have found that I always need to start with somatic work.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah. I'm like, yes. Okay. Because I didn't arrange for you to say that. So I like it.
I have found that when people are first coming in, their nervous system is so dysregulated, Betsy, that it's so hard for me to even see where to start with the biology, because everything is a mess. It's like walking into a room that is just chaotic. And it's like, you know what? We just need to clear a path through the room so that then we can start to look to see how do we even go about organizing this? And that's how I see the somatic piece. So for me, what I've done is I've created and designed a 21-day journey into the nervous system through somatic practices that allows that path through the chaotic room to even know, all right, where do we need to start with the biology? And then moving forward, it's not like we only do biology. No, like we are always combining somatic work. I do an advanced somatic work, bringing in parts work or that internal family systems, bringing in the thoughts and the belief systems, and I'm doing the biology. And I have found that by using those three things, they feed off of each other, because when I do more of the somatic work, I increase their ability to do the biology work. And when I do the biology work, I actually am increasing their capacity for the somatic work. And so it's like we do one step on the somatic work, and then we do one step on the biology, one more step with the somatic work. Oh, now we know that we've got this biology piece that's actually interfering and decreasing our increased capacity to tap into more with the somatic work. So again, when you look at it through the lens of the nervous system and trauma, and you can see that that's all affecting the nervous system. So we can't just take one piece and be like, oh, it's only biology, and you need to either go get on a mood medication, or we need to only do testing. No,
or it's genetic and you'll just have this, or it's never going to change.
And I'm going to tell you, it's rarely genetic.
Okay.
I'll just throw this out there for your audience. It is rarely genetic because epigenetics plays a much larger role in trauma than genetics.
And
epigenetics plays a much larger role in trauma than genetics.
Okay.
So that's a little teaser. That's a little teaser for your audience.
Yeah.
So,
I think we need to remember that, because sometimes we're just like, oh, this happened to me, and now it's like, this doesn't,
or it runs in my family, and therefore it's genetic.
Yes. Oh, yes, exactly.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Are there any health areas that you say like, oh no, I don't think this would help with, say, like cancer, or, you know, does it reach into every area of health that you've seen?
For me, yes, because again, going back to this idea that the nervous system is what drives our health. And so I don't care what you're diagnosed with. When you help regulate your nervous system, you will be in your best health for your specific circumstance.
I love that, because just a little background on the pain science side of things. A lot of times they're saying, you know, this is for chronic pain, but not necessarily autoimmune disorders, or, you know, if it's cancer or infection, things like that, or fracture. You know, I'm not going to mess with someone's fracture and think we're just going to heal it with the mind. And, you know, we want some treatment for some of those things, but as they're doing the treatment, I think it's so helpful to have that context of, it's possible. I know for me, the first book I read that said ulcerative colitis could be healed by this mind-body pathway, you know, I was like, sweet. And I didn't know that it wasn't supposed to be something that you treated this way until after I'd already healed, fortunately. But, you know, the autoimmune issue is a little gray area from
not for me,
people who may listen to my podcast. But yeah, this is good. This is listen to Aimie, everyone.
Autoimmunity is totally driven by the nervous system.
Yeah, I don't know why. Why do medical professionals have a hard time understanding and really telling that to people?
Because they don't know the science yet. Like, and the science is there, right? When you look at the studies for the adverse childhood experiences, for example, and you see the association between autoimmune conditions and early childhood, like the science is there, Betsy. I think that where we've possibly not been able to go that next step is that we haven't, as medical professionals, right? So now I'm kind of talking to my group of people where we've dropped the ball, is that we haven't known what to do with that, right? And it's like, okay, so if autoimmunity is associated with early childhood trauma and stress, as a medical professional, what do I do with that? I don't know, which means that I'm not even going to acknowledge it. And so for me, that's where I'm like, well, let me find out what to do about it. Because that actually was part of my story, was that when I experienced my health crash, my autoimmune markers were very high, and they were just waiting for more symptoms to diagnose me with an autoimmune condition. And I'm like, no, this is not going to be the rest of my life. And I'm going to figure out what do I need to do to get off this path? And so much of it, not all of it, right? And that's where we just talk about that. It's the combination of what do I need to do to regulate my nervous system? And it's always going to be this combination of things, somatic work. And there's so many different modalities that come under that term, somatic work. There really somatic work and the biology work, because both of those are feeding into the nervous system. It's just amazing to see the results that we can get in people's energy level and helping them have more capacity in their somatic work. They've just like their stress capacity goes up, and now the things that used to stress them out and put them in overwhelm, they're able to stay present for and actually work through and not have it turn into chronic stress. It's just amazing when we can clear out some of these things that are constantly driving dysregulation and just get them out of the way. And let's look at like, all right, what's going on? What's our baseline? And what are some of the other biology things that we can address that will support the nervous system and healthy neuroplasticity with the therapy that they're doing?
Amazing. Very cool. Are there any other things that came to mind that you haven't shared already that you'd like to share with the audience?
There are a ton of things, right? Like I feel like we are just skimming the surface.
This is,
and I would say that for for those who want to know like more of all of the different aspects of this biology of trauma and accelerating the healing journey, that's why I put together my programs. And I actually have a biology of trauma summit where I've got over 40 experts that are coming to talk about all of these different pieces that I incorporate into this model, that they can start to look at, hey, what are maybe some pieces that I haven't known to bring in yet, that maybe if I bring that in, it will really move the dial and allow me to move faster in these other areas that I'm already incorporating. So I encourage people to come register for that summit if they'd like to know more of all of these different aspects of the biology of trauma.
Yeah, and there's some big names there. Congratulations, Gabor Mate and Stephen Porges and Peter Levine. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great bridging of the two worlds of functional medicine and trauma therapy. So we're talking about all of that, both on the trauma therapy side of things, the somatic work, all of that, the dorsal vagal response, and the actual physiology and biology that's affecting people's healing journey.
Well, I love seeing all of that work come together, because I think the more we incorporate the nervous system and understanding it into our medical practices and how we treat people, oh my gosh, it's exciting to think of the possibilities. Yes. So keep getting the word out, and I'm happy to help spread that word too.
Thank you, Betsy.
My pleasure having you here, and maybe we'll be able to have you here again. But if anyone's interested, we'll have a link in the show notes about the Biology of Trauma Summit. It's coming up in August, and it's going to be virtual, right? Is it virtual?
Yes, all virtual, all online, and free.
And free. Okay, very cool. Lots of cool information, and very exciting to talk to you today about it. Thanks, Aimie.